Protected Speech with Ravi Kapur and Jonathan Choe.
Back for another edition of Protected Speech along with Jonathan Choe. I'm Ravi Kapur, and we're going to get right into the big news of this week. Seattle passed an ordinance involving caste, the first caste law on the books anywhere in the country. It's going to be applied to their anti-discrimination laws. It could cause a huge ripple effect around the country. We've obviously been covering this topic on this show for weeks on end because I think it's very serious, very important. Jonathan, being in Seattle, you've seen some of the primary folks involved in this movement, namely Kshama Sawant, the council member there who initiated this thing, and it got passed within 1 month of her putting it out there.
Yeah, I was really stunned to see her ground game at work, her supporters, the people she mobilized behind this. That was the key. They really came out in support of this, were vocal and had the numbers. And the folks who were opposed to this, it felt like their voices weren't being heard. The concerns weren't being heard. It was just being drowned out by Sawant and her initiative, her agenda. And here we are today.
Well, it's a fascinating subject on many levels, and I want to get into it with a real subject matter expert, which is Suhag Shukla from the Hindu American Foundation. But before we get to Suhag, I just want to recap briefly what's taken place. So, over the last couple of years, there's been a number of resolutions that have been passed by cities and counties and even some universities around the country. A lot of it apply to what's going on in India. And, resolutions are one thing, but actually having an ordinance on the books specific to caste is a different dynamic. And what was interesting to me is that Sawant, in her messaging during this, basically they took public comments and then they had a vote. Sawant afterwards grabbed the mic and basically said some stuff about India, which I thought was very telling. It wasn't really specific to Seattle, but she was calling out the government of India. And I think that's what is fascinating about this because, we have not seen an actual case in Seattle regarding caste discrimination, and yet this law was put on the books in a very rapid manner.
Yeah, this is a classic case, in my opinion, of virtue signaling. Basically, this is an irrelevant topic here in Seattle. No one in the local media was covering it before this popped up. And again, as your viewers and listeners and everyone who follows us knows, we've already reported on this, that Sawant is not running for the city council again after her term is up in the next year. She's taking her game and her message of socialism and communism national. She's going to be pushing for that workers' coalition. And again, I think this is just one of many shots being fired from the national stage moving forward. And right now, India's in focus and the target.
Well, let's bring on an expert on this topic, someone who's been namely kind of in the crosshairs because the Hindu American Foundation has been called out repeatedly by some of these folks trying to get caste on the books in different venues. Suhag Shukla joins us now, and we really appreciate her time because she's been making the rounds on different media venues as someone who's been seeing this matter develop over a number of years. Suhag, thank you for being with us. Give us your perspective on what took place in Seattle. Was it done in a hasty manner, or is this just the way laws like this get on the books?
Laws are definitely not made in this manner. I mean, first of all, to Jonathan's point, yes, there was a ground game, but the ground game actually came from across the country. These were not local people concerned about a local issue. And I would say that those who are going to be most directly impacted by this were the ones who were opposing the proposal, and they were caught off guard. In terms of rulemaking, to be able to, a lot of the headlines say that history's been made. Yes, history has been made, that after a century, we're seeing laws that specify and single out communities, specifically communities of color. It was bad enough that the original proposal said South Asians. And I think that, some of the letters that we had sent expressing and flagging some constitutional concerns about equal protection and due process got the council member to try to remedy it. And she actually made it worse. She added Southeast Asians, specifically Japanese people, as well as some African communities. And she called out Nigerians, Senegalese and Somali people as somehow being so inherently bigoted alongside South Asians that we merit a special law that's going to police our communities.
Suhag, I wanted to ask you really quick. I mean, at the end of the day, you've been following Sawant in her career, I'm sure, from a distance. What's her angle here? What's her motive in suddenly bringing this up? Because again, her playbook seems to be everything you just laid out. She's all about mobilizing, but also bringing in a tremendous amount of support from outside of Seattle, not just nationally, but she also has a global following. What is she trying to accomplish with this?
Look, I think she and her allies are more concerned about politics in India and the ground that they've lost there. The current political party in power, the BJP, is to them, just Nazism or whatever it is, in spite of the fact that this is a democratically elected government there and a party there. So, what's happening is that the Indian American community becomes collateral damage. They're dragging issues from India to city councils where honestly the focus should be on safe streets, safe neighborhoods, and instead expending money on targeting minorities and making the city of Seattle less safe and less welcome for all people.
So, Hog, I want to play a video for you that was released by the Equality Labs executive director, Tenmori Sundarajan. We've had her come on our programs in the past and very articulate, passionate about this subject matter. I want to get your reaction to what she said in the aftermath of the Seattle law getting passed.
Sure.
J-Beam from Seattle on this wonderful historic day where Seattle has become first in the nation to ban caste discrimination. It is the first city outside of South Asia to do so. And I just want to tell everybody this is a win that is rooted in Dalit feminism. We have seen here that this is where an intersectional politics really work. And we won because caste-oppressed people were not alone. We were flanked by workers. We were flanked by other feminists, people who work with survivors of domestic violence, queer folks, indigenous folks, Black liberationists. There was no movement that didn't see themselves in Dalit struggle because we were already deeply embedded with them in a shared vision for liberation. So I'm so proud to be here and to have seen this incredible win. And for folks to know just the scope and the scale of what we did, we had over 4,000 emails, 200 organizations, and a coalition of 30 caste-oppressed civil rights organizations that make up and support over hundreds of thousands of caste-oppressed people across North America. So this is our time, and I think the caste equity movement is such a beacon of hope because basically, we are making interfaith and intercaste alliances that really help us confront our intergenerational wounds. And what we are seeing is that South Asians do not want to be connected to each other through the trauma of caste anymore. And so it's incredible to see these kinds of political processes as pathways for deep healing. And we had many people who testified for the first time. And I think the thing that I was just so moved by was that how our people turned pain into power. Is there hope? There is definitely hope. And in many ways, the organizing around the caste equity movement is so powerful because it shows us a different way of how we might interact with each other as South Asians. It tells us that we can let go of our intergenerational trauma and build meaningful intercaste, interfaith, and multiracial relationships that can heal us, as well as point us to radical Dalit feminist futures. Jai Bhim and Jai Savitri.
I think her pitch is like letter perfect now in terms of what she's trying to get across. Give me your perspective.
Well, I don't think she's actually solved any problems. The Carnegie Endowment survey, one of the most reliable surveys on Indian American attitudes, show that caste-based discrimination is exceedingly rare. I would say that even one case is one too many, and existing policies have not even been tested. And there are categories like national origin and ancestry that are a broad umbrella. They're facially neutral, meaning that they don't necessarily point to any single person from a group or a background that's always going to be seen as a victim or is always going to be seen as the victimizer. And so categories like ancestry or even ethnicity and national origin adjacent categories are broad enough and are generally applicable enough that they have evolved as America becomes increasingly diverse. And so these could and should arguably cover caste-based discrimination. I think that a couple years down the line, her legacy will be that she endangered a micro minority in this community, and she endangers people from all social backgrounds, from all caste backgrounds. You know, they talk in these terms of caste oppressed and caste dominant. We're all here in the United States as a micro minority, brown, visibly a minority. And there are areas where we need to be working together against the types of discrimination that the vast majority of Indians do report facing. That same survey, Carnegie, said that over half the people surveyed, and there were 1,000 people responding to that, said that they had faced some sort of discrimination. Most of them were facing color-based discrimination. So to now put a target on all of us with these special policies that now put the target on all South Asians is the classic self goal. And that is what her legacy is going to be.
Suhag, I was listening to, what was just shared moments ago, and, Equality Labs is clearly an advocacy group. Yet at the same time, I'm listening to that, and half of that I couldn't even follow. What about for the average Indian American, right? The average Hindu American? How are they feeling about this? Because it sounds like I'm talking or listening to an academic, and I want to know how this translates actually into the diaspora, to the average person just listening to this language and this talk. How are they reacting and feeling right now?
Yeah, I think, for a lot of average people, what we've learned in our conversations with the community is one, a lot of people don't know what the downstream impact is going to be. Because on paper, and in the way that they've been able to kind of build the narrative and get the support from the mainstream media, is there's this widespread discrimination, which is not founded in any verifiable evidence, but in their survey, Equality Lab survey, which the Carnegie survey has a lot to say about, including the fact that there's confirmation bias, sample bias, manipulation of data by throwing out responses where people did not respond with a caste. And so you have this inflation of numbers for the purpose of advocacy. And now you have policies that are being made on that basis. Now, some of the testimony, or if you read the report, the Equality Labs report, what are the types of things that they're saying are indication of caste-based discrimination? A vegetarian diet, going to the temple, celebrating Diwali or Holi. So I'm not quite sure that the community is aware of what the implementation of this policy will look like, because you know that it's Equality Labs and the allies who have shaped the policy. And now when you look at Seattle, for instance, there's funding set aside, $185,000 in the first year, $100,000 going forward. I'm sure there's going to be the hiring of caste experts. Well, who are they going to hire? Of course, they're going to hire the folks that have been kind of on the inside of these policies. And these organizations have a very definitive anti-Hindu record. And that's what we're going to start seeing, is that sort of kind of silencing effect of Hindus, South Asians generally. And that is what's the travesty of the situation.
Let me ask a quick follow-up. Aside from HAF and some others, when will Indian Americans mobilize and start fighting back for real and really getting involved? What is that going to potentially look like?
I really think that, look, the whole equation of caste with Indians or caste with Hinduism is something that is a legacy from colonialism, and it's a narrative that's the predominant narrative. It is fortified through our public school education system, where sixth graders learn this very reductive and inaccurate depiction of Indian society and Indians. So the narrative is going to be one that's a very tough battle to face. I think where the best hope is in the courts. because the United States is built on principles of equal protection and due process. That's why we've taken a similar policy with the Cal State University system in California, where we're supporting two faculty members who are saying, hey, wait a minute, you can't just add a category that's facially discriminatory, where all of the legislative intent and testimony focused in on and demonized South Asians, and then think that you are going to be protecting all people in the same way on those campuses. So that's where I think this battle will ultimately come to justice.
Is it fair to say, though, there'll be like 50 battles like this in every state? You're going to have corporate battles, you'll have local city battles, you might have stuff at the county level, at the federal level. Is likely the next step?
It feels like it, but in my conversations with a number of places that might have been on the verge of passing or considering these types of policies, once you're able to sit down and get their ear and show them what legal precedent shows and what the downstream legal ramifications would be in putting into their policies a facially discriminatory category as opposed to facially neutral categories, I think most Americans understand. I think that this whole battle is a microcosm of a broader trend that's seeking to divide all of us rather than unify us on the basis of our humanity.
One of the aspects of this which is so challenging is that the CSU matter, some of these other universities, there have been no actual claims that have come forth. In the CSU matter, I mean, there was not one person. I'm sure maybe there's some discrimination that took place. I think that's what's so challenging is I don't think I know anybody that wants overt discrimination to take place, but it's really hard when there's not substantive evidence. I mean, for those of us that like work in that world, I mean, I'm not an attorney, but as a journalist, I mean, we cover court cases all the time. You have to have evidence. You can't just make charges.
Right.
And people, and I will say this, discrimination happens at all these different levels. I mean, people discriminate almost on a daily basis. I mean, people get judged for how they look, how they sound, who they associate with. If you look like a CEO or if you look like a homeless person, you get judged. You could be wearing a hoodie and they'll judge you doing that. So I'm really wondering, what you do about these matters when you have these private conversations with public officials, because I think it's also going to affect things politically. With 2024 on the horizon, we're seeing this movement spread across the country, and I think it's going to have a long-lasting impact. I mean, anyone who seems to oppose or at least challenge or question what's going on is branded as a bigot, is branded as a right-winger. And it's kind of stunning that this is the kind of invective that's out there.
Well, to me, if the only counter you have is an ad hominem and you can't debate on the merits, then you're not really standing on solid ground. And the question for those of us who have opposed the policy is not whether we need to have protections for caste-based discrimination. It's how are we going to protect against caste-based discrimination? And what we hold is that it has to be existing policy. Now, we know from the professors at CSU that when they approached the chancellor, when they approached even the union that's supposed to represent all faculty members, regardless of their background, to ask, well, hey, have there been any allegations, any claims filed? And the answer was no. The same thing is happening at Brown University, which was one of the most recent universities to add caste to their non-discrimination policy. They did not have a single allegation made. And the one case that is pending, and that is the one with the California Civil Rights Department having gone after Cisco. If you do some digging into the actual facts of the case, there's some real questions that we should be asking about the California state government and perhaps an abuse of power. Certainly the defendants are asking that because they have most recently filed a sanctions motion. The story is, the way the media has presented, that John Doe, who is a self-identified Dalit, was the only Dalit in this department at Cisco, and that two of these other Indian origin managers discriminated against him. Well, one of those managers is the one who was a classmate of his from IIT, which is like the Indian Institute of Technology. It's like the premier Ivy League of India. The manager recruited him. If this manager, who also happens to have two relatives who are Dalit, had some animus against Dalits, why would he have done that? John Doe also signed a package of several $1 million in stock grants, was amongst the highest paid employees at Cisco. And here's this clincher, that in that department there are only 3 head positions. One of them was held by a self-identified Dalit. But the story that we have seen in mainstream media is that you have all of these high caste Hindus running amok and discriminating against this poor soul Dalit. And that if you just go a little bit below the surface into the court records, all of that is there in plain view.
That's just unbelievable listening to you right now. And, earlier you alluded to the fact that this fight will really be, in the courts, but at least in terms of the court of public opinion, it just isn't getting the proper coverage in the mainstream press. And that's why the average American is still clueless about this. How does this get out there then, this important narrative? Because I really believe this could set a precedent, not just for the Indian American community, Hindus out there, but any other group then, right? Or anyone else who wants to, start claiming class or caste discrimination, right?
Yeah.
What's stopping others? But at the same
That's
time, this story and narrative is so important to understand because I feel like it just keeps popping up out of nowhere. People are being caught off guard. And I think that's the playbook from the, likes of Shama Sawant and Equality Lab. So again, how does this narrative continue to get out there to the average American?
Well, I think this is where shows like this are so important. I mean, we had someone from, a historically socially disadvantaged community in India who has been a tech worker here in the United States since the early 2000s, pen an op-ed in which he was offering an alternative viewpoint that, look, I don't consider myself oppressed. I am a active member of my Hindu and South Asian community, and I oppose these proposals. I see them as dangerous. I see them as leading to, long-term discrimination against South Asians. And some of that's going to become very subtle because if South Asians and Hindus are seen as carrying this kind of legal morass with them, or even this kind of institutionalized implicit bias, why would I want to hire South Asians, right? So he penned an op-ed. I can't tell you how many rejections he saw. We were trying to help him get it pitched and get it placed because it was an important perspective, one that's been ignored in this very convenient and lazy narrative of there's one group that is perpetually oppressed. Let's forget the fact that they've gone to like very wealthy, expensive private schools, or have lived in some of the highest income areas in the country in California. And yet, when there's an alternative viewpoint from that same community, it's demonized. In fact, council member Sawant also demonized people when I think it was council member Nelson who pointed out that, hey, I've gotten a letter from another group that says that they are Dalit and they oppose this. And she said, well, every community has their kind of sellouts. And she pointed to African Americans who might oppose some of the trends in DEI and just immediately diminished their voices. If she is, that's in fact is so patronizing because she claims to come from a dominant caste background. So now she's going to silence. Where is her, call for equality and lifting the voices of the oppressed there when they don't agree with her?
Well, it does seem that I think one of the disconnects I have in this matter is because Shama Sawant, in her speech during that victory speech, effectively said that she was a Brahmin, and then took her pot shots at India, which I see as kind of a standard practice. But India is being run right now by Prime Minister Modi, who was democratically elected, and I don't think he came from some kind of fancy upper caste background. From what I recall, I understand he would sell chai at train stations as a child. I mean, to me, that seems like someone who came from nothing and has built this unbelievable career. I think he's, quite frankly, the most powerful politician in the world right now.
Well, yeah.
Frankly speaking, he's controlling the world's largest democracy. So I just find some of this rhetoric, I think it takes away from some of their arguments, which, let's face it, I don't think anybody wants discrimination to take place. But, I think the evidence has to demonstrate that, and people should fight it out, and hopefully we'll get this thing settled in the courts once and for all. But I do think we've been covering it so aggressively because I think it's a major situation, kind of a flashpoint in terms of our experience here as part of the diaspora.
Well, if I could just add a couple of things there to what you said, is that yes, you're right that the current Prime Minister Modi, comes from what's designated as an OBC background. The current president comes from a tribal background. The former president came from a scheduled caste or Dalit background. So, those are inconvenient facts for the activists that are pushing these policies, because, as I said at the beginning, their gripe is actually with the current political party in India. And the other thing is that in terms of a self goal, quite honestly, the only people that I've been seen engaging publicly in casteist rhetoric are these so-called Dalit activists who are constantly demonizing quote unquote Brahmins. And when I said that they have scored a self goal, what they don't understand is that while in India there might be embedded into the law ideas of a permanent victim and permanent victimizer, in the United States, that's not the case. So some of their rhetoric, if they continue with it, whether they're professors teaching and creating a hostile environment in their classrooms where students are from those Brahmin backgrounds and feel very uncomfortable or feel that it's impacting their educational experience, well, guess what? They're going to be liable regardless of whether there's a caste category or not, because ancestry would cover their casteism.
We're going to continue to follow this. Suhag Shukla, Executive Director and co-founder of the Hindu American Foundation. Thank you so much for providing all this context for us.
Thanks a lot.
We're going to move forward now for another interesting topic. We've been following all of these different presidential candidates getting into the race, from Donald Trump to Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy. Well, Haley's candidacy has caused some fervor from the left and the right, which I think has been interesting. Certainly on the right, there's a lot of Trump supporters. There's going to be folks supporting DeSantis. I don't think Haley's going to run away with the GOP nomination. She's going to have challenges there. Ramaswamy's now in the mix as well. But interestingly enough, and certainly as Haley is being a GOP candidate, she's going to have a pushback from the left. But I was fascinated, Jonathan. You probably saw this. Don Lemon from CNN took a pot shot at Nikki Haley. And then we had these other pundits that have primarily been on like CNN and MSNBC also taking shots at Nikki Haley. And I don't understand why they have to take pot shots about her appearance, her age. Go after her on policy. That's fine. But I was astonished at what was taking place.
Yeah, and especially Don Lemon making that foolish statement about women past the age of 30 not being in their primes. I mean, of course, he had to walk that back, took a few days off. Some called it a suspension, but now he's now back on air. Apologized again, but yeah, I've never really seen this ever. First of all, Nikki Haley continues to be a trailblazer, a first, in many cases. But instead of the left, especially uplifting that, right? They're talking about always, hey, you're the first this, the first that, woman, minority. They're not using any of that to put her on a pedestal. They're just tearing her down. And again, like you said, not on any of her credentials, because she has impeccable credentials. But man, you've got to make a case. Because I think a lot of these folks talking right now, it's clearly political, it's clearly partisan. And she's just in the wrong party, according to her critics. Anyone in the GOP, considered conservative, considered the enemy, according to some, especially at CNN and MSNBC. But yeah, she's really being put through the ringer. But I think in the end, she's looking good out of this. She's actually getting a lot of media attention early on, as she is a contender as president. So to be the next president. So I think this is going to work out in her favor.
Yeah, I just want to recount briefly some of these remarks just to show you how, like, honestly childish they sound like. I mean, these are people who are ostensibly reputable commentators that get paid to be on these national networks. One guy, Wajahat Ali, he's a Bay Area resident, went to some elite prep schools, one of which I went to. So we have we're the same, we're alums from the same school. And this guy's taking shots at, and I understand if you don't like her politics, that's totally fine. But to pull up Wajahat's statement, he called Nikki Haley the perfect Manchurian candidate. Is that appropriate? For a
This day and
political
age,
analyst?
anything goes. So, I mean, I'm
I
not
guess
surprised.
anything goes. Now, that's one thing, and then Asha Rangappa, another. Again, these are Democratic commentators, both of whom have been compensated by these news networks to give their comments. Rangappa was criticizing Haley's name. Nikki's actually her middle name, but of course, and I understand this because Bobby Jindal was obviously blasted for being called, for using Bobby rather than his given name, Piyush.
The guy's
But
in Louisiana. Let's give him
right,
a break.
absolutely. But Nikki's actually her middle name on her birth certificate, and I think we have to have more compassion for people's plight, and this is true also of Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is a mixed race woman who's Indian and black who grew up in Oakland and Berkeley. Her experience growing up at that age is very similar to what Nikki Haley went through growing up as the daughter of immigrants, of Sikh immigrants from India, growing up in South Carolina. You're going to try to do what you can to fit in. I know, Jonathan, you and I have had our own share of challenges, fitting into American society as Asian American men. We don't even fit into the media. There's no show like this on television.
Yeah.
So I have great
Being an
empathy
Asian
for
male is a
Kamala and
liability
Nikki.
in the media.
Yeah. I just I don't understand why just because you don't get along with someone ideologically, you got to take shots at their identity. Listen, that's their life experience. And if Nikki Haley wants to run as a Republican or Vivek Ramaswamy, let him do it. And Kamala Harris is comfortable as a Democrat. She's welcome to do that too. So that was kind of appalling. And then you saw some other youngsters on social media taking pot shots as well, chiming in. I just thought it was really amateurish. But of course, these two comments from these reputable commentators pale in comparison to what on the right Ann Coulter said, who basically went on a podcast and said Nikki Haley needs to go back to her country. And she's, said this in many different venues now. Like I don't know what the deal is between her and Nikki Haley, but I don't like racism on the left and I don't like racism on the right and bigotry of any sort. I think it's ridiculous. Why can't ideas matter? I understand. Maybe she's not your cup of tea, Ann Coulter, but I was just astonished that, this early in the race, Haley's chances of winning the GOP nomination are not high. She's going up against a guy who actually won the presidency, came just short, not to mention another guy named DeSantis who has a huge mandate in Florida. She's got a real uphill climb.
Like I
We're not
said,
even talking.
this is only going to benefit her. I mean, if people weren't taking all of these shots at her, she wouldn't be in the news cycle as she is now. So she actually should be thankful, in my opinion. But at the same time, yeah, there's no more decorum. We live in a new era that's being fueled by likes and tweets and social media. It's about the talking heads, the pundits with the best hot takes get the most attention. I think that's all this is. So
No,
I think Haley is a veteran. She's a pro. She definitely holds herself with dignity. And I think she's laughing right now. Yeah. Is it ridiculous? What Ann Coulter said, is it acceptable? Absolutely not. We should not be tolerating that type of language. Go back to your country. Ann Coulter should go back to whatever white Western European country that her ancestors are from. So, look, again, Coulter really surprised. Clearly, there's something there. But again, overall, you're seeing a lot of the criticism come from the left and the Democrats. So this is really turning into a partisan issue. And again, if they didn't think she was an actual threat, I don't think that they'd be going after her like this. But I think she could be a viable candidate at the very least, maybe as a vice president.
I mean, just as an aside before we move on, I mean, I had friends of mine that identify as Republicans who texted me, were like, what is Ann Coulter saying? Like, they were grossly offended by her comments.
Ann
Again,
Coulter doesn't
as
have
a
any
Republican
credibility.
supporter.
She's irrelevant. She's not even in the news cycle. Where is she? Was she on Twitter?
Maybe she got about a week of buzz. Maybe that's the way she sells books.
And that's it. Yeah, no one
Being
buys her books
bigoted.
anymore. She's done.
Right. All right, we're going to move forward from that situation to what Jonathan's following in Seattle. Jonathan, once again, the national media has descended on your fair city.
Yeah, it's been another wild couple weeks. Turning Point USA, big conservative media, now coming to Seattle. Savannah Hernandez, independent journalist, she reached out to me and said, I want to know what's going on in Seattle because I'm following all your tweets and, I'm showing the raw realities on the ground with my coverage of the homeless crisis and the drug epidemic. So she came to see this for herself, and I was essentially her tour guide, and lo and behold, I did not disappoint. Rather, the city of Seattle did not disappoint. In the heart of downtown, the Chinatown International District, you have imagery of just urban decay, open-air drug use, urine bottles everywhere. And again, maybe it's an urban myth, but I know for a fact that the addicts tell me they, pee in bottles, hoping to, gather some of their, remnants from the fentanyl that they just took and maybe get a little high later on in the day. Regardless of whether or not that's an urban myth, they're doing it. That's a fact, and I stand by that. And Savannah saw it for herself. And we saw one guy digging through the trash looking for foil, hoping that he'd find either, fentanyl or crack or meth or whatever. And it's just a sad scene in Seattle right now. And I think it was so important to have an outside perspective, right? I mean, you being in San Francisco, you see it in your own backyard as well. But I really see value in journalists coming from outside to really add another vantage point and lens. So that's what I really appreciated with Savannah's, journalism.
I mean, she has a different audience that she brings to the table. So what was the perspective that she brought? I mean, when she goes to town, she's looking at, again, Seattle's supposed to be one of the crown jewels of this country. She walks around town with you. What is she saying? What really took her aback?
Yeah, I think it was really the needles everywhere and the pipes, just people having access to harm reduction, quote unquote harm reduction toolkits. Look, in places like San Francisco, places like Seattle, they're all about giving out free needles. I'm all for harm reduction as well, in the sense that we don't want people getting diseases. We don't want people overdosing. But when you just hand out needles without getting them back, that's not a needle exchange. So what's happening with this harm reduction lobby, this multi-billion-dollar industry, the addicts aren't being required to go into treatment, or they're not being, monitored and helped. They just have free will choice. And in the meantime, these groups just keep on giving them brown bags full of needles, pipes, fentanyl strips, foil, all the tools to do drugs. And again, Savannah picked up on that and just was stunned that taxpayer dollars, millions of dollars, is going into this, but there's nothing really for, intervention and that type of treatment, especially addiction and mental health treatment. So those are some of the themes that she picked up on as well. And also just the filth, the trash, the garbage, the human feces everywhere. She was just shocked to see it. At blocks, minutes from City Hall, you have homeless encampments where just people are living this way.
And in a related story, you've also uncovered that you have students that are in the middle of all this.
Yeah, it's really sad. An exclusive I broke actually today. I went on Fox News with Jesse Waters earlier this evening, and it really got his attention as well. Again, Seattle being in the national news for all the wrong reasons, but Summit Sierra High School, one of the top charter schools in the city, is right in the middle of this notorious drug den and homeless encampment and all the open air drug use in the heart of the Chinatown International District on King Street. And for months now, teachers, staff, students, parents have just been begging for help, but state officials, city, county officials have completely ignored the problem. Now, in fairness to Mayor Bruce Harrell, he deployed more police patrols, but it's just not working. And there's no other plan beyond that because no one's being arrested. No one's being prosecuted. And even if they are, they go before a judge who quickly releases them because what are you going to get somebody for? A misdemeanor at best? So this vicious cycle continues and there's no end in sight. And in the meantime, At what point do we start asking the question, why are we compromising the public safety of students over drug addicts and homeless people, right? I mean, that's a real question we have to start asking ourselves. And again, it's an indication of all these progressive failed policies in so many of these West Coast Democratic-led states, like California, in Oregon, and here in Washington State. It's just an absolute disaster.
So when it comes to the students, I know generally we're not speaking to kids that are, high school age, et cetera, but did you get some perspective of what these kids think about what they're going through on a day-to-day basis?
I did. I actually interviewed several high school kids, and they offered fascinating perspective. And it was really sad to hear, the students know exactly what's going on. We were all in high school. At one point, we knew what we were seeing every single day. I mean, they have to dodge drug addicts and dealers. They're trying not to inhale fentanyl fumes when they're walking by the bus stop because there's no other choice. They have to walk through to catch the bus, public transportation, and that's where a lot of these addicts, hang out. That's where all the black markets are thriving because what's happening is that you have a lot of these addicts who jump on public transportation in Seattle. They get dropped off in front of Target. They walk into Target. They steal shampoo, detergent, Legos, sneakers. They literally walk out, no police, no arrest. They jump back on the bus, drops them off in Chinatown International District, and it's the open air black market. Rinse, repeat. And that's exactly what's happening. And again, the fact that the policymakers, the elected officials, again, are either turning a blind eye, completely ignoring this, or paralyzed is just a failure of the system.
And from a national perspective, it seems like Seattle continues to get this kind of attention. Are they seeing Seattle as a complete anomaly, or is this like commonplace now?
Yeah, I'm hoping that one day it does become an anomaly, but this is all over the West Coast. This is in Los Angeles, San Francisco. I mean, Kapur, I encourage you to actually leave the comforts of your office and head into downtown Seattle.
No, I'm staying in the studio, man. You know that. I don't leave my four walls.
Look, the video don't lie. All joking aside, look, just hit record on your cell phone. That's all I do. I go out with my iPhone, and I just show the raw realities. And that's the job of what we do, right, as journalists. We're the fourth estate. We're the watchdogs. Look, my reports, the politicians hate them because they're now forced to face what's happening on the streets. They can't deny that. Unfortunately, the mayor of Seattle had a state of the city address this past week. And, his job is to be the ultimate cheerleader, to paint a glowing picture of downtown Seattle and all the potential. At the same time, he had a realistic view as well, indicating that crime is up 15-year high last year in violent incidents. Chinatown International District had the most shots fired and shootings. But he didn't have a clear blueprint on how to deal with this. And that's the piece that is the most frustrating for so many business owners and neighbors. And the people have to live next to this. Look, Seattle is one of the most affluent, highly educated cities in America. It is the epicenter for big tech and also the video game industry. These people aren't stupid. They know exactly what's going on. So when the mayor doesn't come up with clear solutions and a timeline and a metric for what success actually looks like, people will call him on it. So look, he's only in his second year, but I would say right now he's feeling some political pressure. They want deliverable results, measurable results. And again, when the narrative starts to get painted, students versus the rights and the needs of drug addicts and the homeless, and parents start getting involved, that's not a winning formula for politicians.
Well, the reality is I'm seeing this increasingly, Jonathan. These politicians do not want video anywhere near them. And, you hold them to account. I was trying to conduct some interviews this week, and all these folks are like, nope, off the record. They just do not want video to go somewhere and get, obviously they're going to get spun in different directions.
Twitter, they're afraid of social media, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all the platforms that we're on. It's no longer just about the newspapers or the radio or the one-time viewing on television. It lives forever on the internet, man. The Google machine, it's all there. What happened recently too, just in the past day, my friend and colleague Savannah Hernandez flew to East Palestine, Ohio, with that train derailment, and Pete Buttigieg, after 3 weeks, transportation secretary, finally shows up. He gets confronted by the media mob, and his press handler straight up says, no interviews, I'll do the interviews, but get this, no one can record. What? It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. We've got to push back against these media handlers, these PR hacks.
I agree 1,000%, 1,000%, and this is across the board. I mean, what Jonathan just said, I'm seeing that at the local level. I'm seeing that at the federal level. Let's move forward briefly to talk about another heinous attack. This one took place again. A young woman there getting egged by a man also hurling racial slurs. I don't even know what to say about this stuff anymore, Jonathan. This is, by the way, sponsored by the California Public Library. But once again, indiscriminate hate, visceral hate, throwing eggs at someone. Fortunately, there was a glass window between the eggs and the young lady in question who was visiting San Francisco. But this is happening in my hometown. I'm honestly just greatly disturbed that this is happening. That we have such a vibrant Asian American community. It's a huge part of the essence of San Francisco. And to see people who can't even just frolic around what is still a beautiful city, it's heartbreaking.
You know what's really sad? Aside from a few local reports, the sense is everyone's tired. No one cares anymore. And I think that's the biggest travesty in this case. I mean, we got to keep on reporting this. We got to keep on talking about this. We got to bring perspective and analysis and context here, because this is taking a toll on the Asian American community, one of the hardest immigrant groups out there. You know, this model minority myth really is a myth. There are some of the most poor, homeless folks who are Asian Americans here in Seattle that I see. I'm barely making it in the Chinatown International District, and they're the ones being targeted by these idiots. So, I mean, look, it keeps on happening. It's got to be highlighted.
And before we go, I just want to send our condolences to the folks over at Spectrum News 13 in Orlando, Florida. We lost a journalistic colleague, 24 years old, young man, literally assassinated while doing his job. Jonathan and I have been on the front lines for 2 decades. We sit here in the studio to do this show very comfortably, but you've seen with Jonathan's videos, he's out there every day. I go out there in the field quite a bit. You don't expect to get assaulted, let alone gunned down. His fiance was there. I mean, it was terrifying. We broadcast in Orlando. We just want to send our deep condolences to all the folks. It's a terrible tragedy, and I understand people get upset at the media, but journalists overwhelmingly are trying to do their job, trying to report to protect this democracy. They genuinely do it. I know so many of these folks around the country, so we want to express that. Very sorry to the families, all the victims there in Orlando. For Jonathan Choe, I'm Ravi Kapur. We'll see you again next time.